I'm Andrew Levine, the CEO of Koinos Group, developers of the Koinos blockchain. And in the following episode of the Koinos Group podcast, I talk with one of my co-founders at Koinos Group and one of the blockchain architects of Koinos, Michael Vandeberg. We talk about blockchain speed. And when most people talk about blockchain speed, they usually talk about transactions per second, which are a function of block size and block times. But internally, I've found that typically when we talk about speed as blockchain developers, we talk about reindex time. And so I asked Michael why that is, and that led to a really interesting conversation that I think will help everyone understand what the really important aspects of speed are when we're talking about making a blockchain fast. So I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Reindex time is why you'll never have a computer that can simulate the universe. If our block time is real time, then at whatever point I start, I can never catch up. Why we care about reindex time is because it is important for somebody to be able to launch a node and get caught up. And if reindex time is too high, even with like snapshotting and other techniques, we could still create a system in which catching up to the head block is never possible. It matters to us from a resource perspective. Transactions per second and transaction latency still matters to me. But I guess I view those as different issues entirely. So let's just say that every year we're only willing to add 1 day of reindex time. So every year, once the blockchain is live, for every day you're reindexing is worth a year of blockchain time. So I'm gonna estimate and say, so roughly, if I have a 1 second block time, I really can only be executing that block for 1/400th of a second, or 1/365th of a second on average. Because if I reindex longer than that over the course of a year, I will then average to more than 1 day per year of existence of the blockchain. Where this does start to relate with, say, block time is that there are certain things that have to happen in a block that have to happen every block, regardless of transactions existing in the block or not. And so at a certain point, that overhead uses too much of the reindex time, and we actually begin losing out on transaction throughput. At a certain point, your transaction throughput decreases to the point that your transaction latency also begins to increase. We want to have lower block times for decreased transaction latency, but if those block times become too short, you can actually hurt transaction throughput and transaction latency. And then that's not to mention the fact that there is latency in the network itself in sending blocks back and forth. And so you have additional side effects of, if blocks are being created too fast, they're probably not linking to one another properly, in which case there's a lot of forking going on all the time. And that can also decrease transaction throughput and transaction latency, so at a certain point, on block times, you get a diminishing return that actually hurts the very metrics you're trying to improve by decreasing your block time.
It sounds like reindexing time is a limiting factor on both transaction throughput and latency, and that's why it's so important. It seems to me like part of the problem is that a lot of people have forgotten or aren't interested in the idea of self-sovereignty, and that this being a system that everybody is capable of participating in, and the point isn't to have a tiny number of extremely wealthy or well-equipped people controlling everything. And so if you want nodes to be accessible, if you want people to be able to run a node and reindex their node and catch up to the current state, it's not as simple as just pushing down the block times as low as possible, even if you can support it, but nobody can run a node and nobody can catch up to the current block on accessible hardware. what good is the system?
Exactly. I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Nailed it.